Yes.
Thank you, Your Holiness. Welcome back. We had an amazing morning. I think we all agree. It might have been a whole graduate course in the chemistry of the brain and neuroscience. I have to confess that there were points at which I felt that my head was hurting as I was taking in all of this amazing information, but I could also hear and sense in the room, throughout the room, these moments of, aha, that's how it works. I think we all really are just so deeply grateful to you, Nora, for that wonderful, wonderful presentation, and Your Holiness to you, too. Yes?
May I add one thing?
You certainly may, always.
I think from childhood, I always look from because of negative side away. If someone tells something, then I always look.
From the contrary side.
That also, we train that way. So one way I really appreciate all the specialists. Really, you are expert. But your own field is really expert. I really very much appreciate. But these things are, from the Buddhist viewpoint, relative. It connected many other things. So in order to become very realistic specialist, you should look wider way. Sometimes, like this, you see, great scientist, look only. No, he's the exception. He's the exception.
Yeah, he's the exception.
Thank you.
Well, Your Holiness, thank you, because that's the perfect introduction to the afternoon, because we hope to widen the lens and look more widely at some of these questions. The other thing, though, that I wanted to comment on this morning, I thanked our presenter, but I also want to thank you because watching you take in this information, this flood of information, and then with your questions, always anticipating the next slide, the next step in the logical sequence that the scientist is pursuing in her research is just extraordinary. And also the intellectual stamina that Your Holiness brings to these interactions is a wonderful demonstration of the value of getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning and meditating every day. So we learn from watching Your Holiness. Thank you. So it's wonderful to have Nora Volkow and her powerful voice as another of the neuroscientists on this impressive neuroscience team we've been hearing from all week. And then also as our only physician, and I did want to mention that among our presenters, Nora is our only physician, and she's committed to this hopeful view.
Amjira, look at the psychiatrist.
Right.
Committed to this hopeful view that, as she often says, and I think said on her first slide, drug addiction is a chronic brain disease that can be treated, and every word in that sentence carries freight for her, because it's a declaration of progress. It's the triumph of modern science over myths and misconceptions that have been with us for many, many years, that painted addicts as lacking in willpower, as morally failed, with flaws, as people who should be treated as deviants, should be separated from society, should be punished criminally. Now, those stereotypes that she is working against in her post in Washington do persist. They have not gone away. And those stereotypes are produced through social processes. They create them, they sustain them. So part of what we want to do this afternoon is to begin to explore some of those larger social processes. But first I wanted to just say that I think we've noted a number of fascinating parallels in these past 2.5 days between the emerging scientific understanding of craving, desire, and addiction and the Buddhist scholarship, or as Your Holiness said, as you were lightly correcting your Jimpa, Thumten Jimpala, with a great smile, not just Buddhist, but ancient Indian philosophy and psychology. we've seen really interesting parallels. And I think there's something both very reassuring in those parallels and also something humbling in them. Reassuring to know that a wisdom tradition extending back some 2,000 years of systematic first-person study of the human mind has reached conclusions that support the findings that are now coming out of the very different and relatively very new third-person investigations of modern science. That's reassuring. Humbling to be reminded that our whiz-bang technology is in part simply confirming things that were already known. But of course, that's only part of the story because they are also pointing us in new directions, and it's the combination that's powerful of the two perspectives. And almost as Keith was explaining to us yesterday, it takes the combination of the activated brain, activated by dopamine, and the cue to create the result. And I think the combination of these two traditions, when they come together, can create a powerful result in a similar way. And I was reminded this morning as I was thinking about that of the words from T.S. Eliot about exploration, where he wrote, "We shall not cease from explorations, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and to know the place for the first time." So I think in part we're seeing a process like that.
정글 종자서. 그래서 어떻게
가나 즉 가다 제바제도 그라 나르 수수 고속서 되게 내주듯이 그래서 다다사바 직도는 치 여러분 내서 당겨서 그냥 들으죠.
Also, I was struck during our conversations yesterday afternoon that another of the deep resonances, deep concordances between these two great intellectual traditions, both of which in many ways are pursuing how do we know reality? How do we find reality and know it when we see it? A similarity is that they pursue that question, both of these traditions, in the context of a community, a very powerful, strong, intentional community, a community that's rooted in very deep values. And for science, it's the community of peer review and of the requirement that results have to be reproducible. Yesterday, Kent's charming, I think, and just disarming humility. He kept saying, "I may be wrong," and we heard the same words from Nora this morning. Those statements are not only because these are wonderful and deeply honest people with great integrity, they're also expressions of a deep value of Western science. The dictum from Albert Einstein that no experiment can ever prove me right, and a single experiment can always prove me wrong. Your Holiness's playful and affectionate comments putting Jimpa on notice that the monks were poised to pounce when he started his presentation, and then pointing out that he had a mistake on one of his slides. He had misspelled a word, was also demonstrating an essential value of a community, a sangha, committed to rationality, to empiricism, to skepticism, to pragmatism. So, and you too often express your willingness to be persuaded if someone can bring you evidence that might prove you wrong. So we have that combination of communities that see the world in that same way that I've described. And we are deeply embedded here in these two powerful communities. And communities are social and cultural constructions. They're the work of societies. An American sociologist, Robert Bellah, wrote a book once called The Good Society, and the opening sentence of that book was, "It's difficult to be a good person in the absence of a good community and a good society." And I think we all agree that that is true. So yesterday, also, Your Holiness, when you were offering Ken a perspective on his puzzle, he called it a puzzle about how fear and desire could possibly be linked in the same brain system. You said, we're all social animals, and when we become isolated or feel alone, that creates fear. And I think all of us in the room recognize the truth in that comment. You and Nora made similar comments to each other this morning. So we turn now, this afternoon, to these social and cultural considerations. And to guide us, we have a wonderful anthropologist, Vibeke Asmussen-Frank. She's an anthropologist, as I say, who directs a Center for Alcohol and Drug Research at Aarhus University in Denmark. She's been there for 12 years. Her own work has been mainly studying marijuana, cannabis as it's called, but also alcohol and alcohol abuse and other drugs. She's studied policies and treatments in community settings and in prisons, with a special focus always. She's always interested in understanding the perspectives of the people who are using the drugs. What is it meaning to them? What are their lives like? Over many years, it's been the case that Scandinavian scholars from the Nordic countries, have made major contributions to alcohol and drug research. They're well known for that, and also to approaches using qualitative methods to try to understand, dig down underneath the underlying meanings of social phenomena. And that's the tradition from which Vibeke comes to us today. So she will be raising questions, she'll be challenging assumptions, and she'll be hoping that by doing this, and by opening these additional layers of complexity, as if the problem isn't complex enough already, that will spark reflection and discussion among the group at another level. In her work, she's most interested in asking, what can we learn when we turn our minds in new directions and try to see new perspectives, new questions that we may not have thought about before. So with that, Vibeke, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Diana.
Yeah.
It is working, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
It is.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude. It's a deep honor and privilege to be here today and to share some of my thoughts with your holiness. And as Diana said, my main interest is in how are individuals, how are people living with substances. And substances has been around the world for many thousands of years, since the beginning of mankind. And substances can be used in very many different ways. We can consume them, we can use them in pleasurable settings for parties and feasts and things like that. And they can become very problematic, as we have heard about the last few days. So some of my interest is also to looking at when and how and with whom are these substances used. And a very important point of departure for most of what I'm doing is that using drugs, whether it's legal or illegal drugs, is always social practices. You do it with other people. At least you start out doing it with other people, and it's in certain contexts that drugs are used. So I would like to go to the slides and start out saying that, sort of trying to put my perspective in what we have been learning the past few days and also this morning, that all the valuable knowledge that we get from studying the brain and from your neuroscience perspectives, I sort of move this brain into a person, but and we have also heard personal or the perspectives seen from the individual, from Jinpala.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good because immediately you know it's human brain.
Yeah, yeah.
not mice.
Not mice.
Or mosquitoes.
Yeah. And not only that, I would like to place individuals in relation to other individuals, and to show that individuals are always placed in context and in social relations, and that these contexts are also larger communities and societies as such, and that these social relations and the whole society affects and shape also the way we look at addiction or problematic drug use. So the overall perspective that I will take today is to look at relations between individuals, but also the dynamics between individuals and the socio-cultural contexts. I will look at processes in and out of substance use, problematic substance use or addiction, but I will always do this from the perspective of that it's relations between individuals that are important here in this perspective. And then I will take the perspective, as Diana pointed out, of the drug user or the substance user. How is it experienced by individuals to use substances?
the substance at control.
So substance would cover alcohol, drugs, and
Yeah,
everything.
yeah. I have put in a slide because I wanted to talk a little bit about the kind of science that I'm doing, which is a bit different from what we have heard the past 3 days. And I would like to start out saying that this presentation is not only based on qualitative research, as I will present in more depth to Your Holiness in a minute, but also on qualitative research using statistics. Quantitative research using statistics and survey results. But my own main field, trained as an anthropologist, is within qualitative research. And the way this kind of science operate is through different methods. And some of them can, for example, be qualitative interviews, where the researcher engage with another person and ask questions and gather data in that way, using focus group interviews where several people are engaged and the researcher go into conversation with these several individuals. It can be participant observation, where the researcher becomes part of a certain setting or certain context for a certain amount of time, and sort of try to live with the people who are in this context. And and this particular method is important in order to try to gain information that is not conscious or spoken about, outspoken, but more tacit knowledge around why is it that we are doing and how is it, or why is it, and the ways that we are doing things. So, and then there's text and documents also. I would also like to say that this kind of research is not linear, it's more circular. So if you have an interview guide, for example, for the qualitative interviews, and you have interviewed 3 or 4 or 5 people, and you realize that one of the most important things that you would like to know something about, you did not put in your interview schedule. You immediately put it in, and the next person you interview, you ask those questions also. So it differs, for example, from survey research, where you have the questionnaire. You would never change that, because then you sort of spoil the whole study. So it's a reflexive, circular process, this kind of research. Of course, the analysis is made more in the end. Yeah. Yeah. of course, the analysis is done more at the end of a research project than in the beginning, but the analysis is part of the whole project. And what comes out is, or what we look at is meaning. What is it? How is it that people in the context that we want to study perceive things or do things? So it comes out in words, not in numbers. We're also looking for patterns and complexity rather than causality. So if there's like two different perceptions of things, we don't see that as a problem. We integrate it into the analysis, and we look for processes and dilemmas rather than facts. And we are very aware of the context and the relations that we study with it, that the study is placed within, and also that shifting context will also shift the perspectives of the analysis and make different results. So this kind of research is not representative, but it can be generalized in a different way than studies that are creating representative data.
What do you mean by representative data? Like something that is...
I mean, like you can say that 10% of the population are problematic drug users, or so that's sort of a...
representative.
Yeah, that's absolute. So in the rest of the presentation, I would like to give 2 instances to Your Holiness of this perspective, a social science perspective. And the first one is different ways out of problematic substance use or addiction. And I will look into treatment and treatment efficacy, and also into this phenomenon called self-change. And the second instance that I would like to bring up is to point out that regulating substances can also cause harm. Usually we regulate substances in our societies in order to create well-being and secure that citizens are not exposed to harms. But some of the ways that we regulate substances can also cause harm. And I will bring up criminalization of drugs as the example here. So going back to the first instance. First, I would like to go back to what has also been said from other presenters, that using substances is sort of on a continuum. And how I see it is it's from either not using or consuming substances to a problematic use pattern. And if we look at some of the numbers from a European perspective, we see that 1 out of 4 Europeans have tried one tried out illegal drugs, and marijuana being the most common drugs tried out by Europeans. But if we look at how many problematic drug users we have in Europe, the numbers differ a great deal. And this is to point out again that substances are used very widely, and they can also be used in an unproblematic way. The second slide I would like to show here is that many substances peak or are used more in a young age, and this is an example with marijuana, and it's Danish data. But if we look at European data, they sort of go in the same direction. And the point here is that we see that young people in their teens and in their early 20s, they use a lot more, but it sort of levels out with age. And and these are for men. The numbers are for men, and the numbers are for women. And I apologize for not having made the same scales, but it's sort of to illustrate that drug use levels out. And one of the most important, or probably the most likely reasons for this.
So what is the explanation for the kind of more frequent use at a young age and then sort of tapering off?
It's the most important reason for this is lifestyle. That young people, they engage in social contexts where they use drugs together with other young people. And then when you grow older, you finish your education, you start working more seriously at least. You get married, you find a partner, you get children. So your lifestyle changes different, very much from the more peer group kind of lifestyle that you have in your younger age.
And jobless?
What about jobless, unemployed? I mean, does it make a difference, the factors?
It makes a difference when we go to problematic drug use. This is sort of still in the line of the continuum between consumption and problematic use. So sort of some of the consumption patterns levels out.
These are just regular, ordinary people. So
yeah.
Drug addicts.
So
this is population research. Oh yeah, this is from the general population. No, they're not addicts. Not necessary.
Quite a big number.
So it's only saying in that case the proportion is quite big.
Yeah.
Maybe
A lot of people use drugs, but not in a regular way necessarily.
So what kind of questions, just out of curiosity, I mean, the question says, have you ever used this last year or ever in your life? I mean, what kind of,
yeah,
where
this
are you
is
getting the
this
numbers?
is whether you have been using the past year or not. Yeah. The numbers are
2009, 2010.
the numbers are higher if you say in lifetime, and they are lower if you say the past month.
And Vibeke, would you say it's true that if anything, these numbers underreport the actual use, or not? Do you think people are honest and willing to say that?
It's hard to say.
Hard to say,
Yeah,
okay.
but I know we have that. I know we have that problem with alcohol.
With
that,
alcohol,
that
yes.
it's usually underreported, but it's debated whether it's in the same way around
Interesting.
drugs.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
So what I will sort of jump into for the rest of the presentation is more what happens when drug use becomes a problem. And one of the ways out of
Has there been any studies done on trying to compare between drug, use like this frequency,
like
in the
Denmark,
urban community versus
Copenhagen.
the rural?
Yeah.
I think a big population is concentrated in Copenhagen, and the rest of the land is less population. So differences.
Yeah, I know the Danish data. Young people in Copenhagen, they use more frequently than young people in urban rural areas in Denmark. Yeah.
The twinjin 가서 뉴스라 맵시에 그걸 더 남아요.
So is it because it's not that easy to get the substances, or is it because there's less interest in the rural areas?
In relation to marijuana, it's the same. It's very easy to get in
the countryside.
also in the countryside. I think it's more related to the different kinds of lifestyle that are also more likely to be in a city, like going out, partying, all that. So going back to the more problematic sides of substance use, so treatment, as we also heard this morning, is a very common way that to offer to problematic drug users or addicts as a way to try to overcome this problem, and we could say that what is treatment? It's any kind of structured intervention, either medical or psychosocial or a combination of both. So substitution drugs can be used, but different kinds of more behavioral kinds of interventions can also be applied. And there are many different forms of treatment, like outpatient treatment, where the patient or the client comes once a week, once every 2 weeks, or something like that. It can be day treatment, where the patient has to show up every day, or it can be residential treatment, where the patient sort of goes to this treatment home and stay for a shorter or longer period of time. And there are many different kinds of treatment models. And I won't go into this here because I know that Sarah will be talking more about this on Friday. But this is just to say that we have treatment, and many societies offer treatment as a way out of problematic substance use. What I would like to show Your Holiness with this slide is that evaluating the effect of treatment, one common way of doing this is to look at how many clients or patients are still abstinent after a certain amount of time, and we can see here on these slides that it's measured up to 12 months after dischargement of treatment, and the slide to the left is results from the early 1970s, late 60s and 1970s, and the curve on the right is the recent data from different kinds of drug treatment, residential drug treatment, residential alcohol treatment, and a treatment form for young people between 14 and 17 years of age. And what I would like to show here is that the curve is sort of the same, that it's within these 30 or 40 years, we still have around 20 or 25% of people who are still abstinent after dischargement of treatment. So, of course, it puzzles a lot of us. What can we do more to sort of raise the efficacy of treatment? And social science offers different kinds of, or certain kinds of insights.
So now we are talking about substance abuse.
Yeah.
So addicts.
Yeah. There's a little confusion around the different terms. In Europe, we tend to use the word problematic drug use. That's the term that the European Monitoring Center for Drug and Drug Abuse wants to use as the official term. So that's why I sort of, because I'm from that part of the world, use a lot also. But it could also be addiction. But so they're different.
Addictions like with Europe to addictions problematic substance use.
수도 가지고 수도 가래.
다그 뇨도 쟁게.
네.
나오 뇨도 쟁게 돈에 제디기도 비주시면서. But would you say that they basically correlate?
I think that it's a way to sort of point at this
As a spectrum,
continuum and say that there are the continuum from addiction, maybe in the one end or the extreme end. There's also other
Gradations.
yeah, that's one thing. And another thing is that there are many different problems that drug users or problematic drug users experience, not only the craving and so on, but also the lifestyle that they get into because of addiction. Like losing friends, losing family, losing your job, living more on the street if you're more of a hardcore drug abuser or addict. And those kind of experiences, losing these social relations and job opportunities and so on, also affects our problems that the drug user experience.
알레 인도 이탈리아 있는 드럭 사링이 너무 비슷해서. 지금 고도도 미사일 먹고 싶대. 지난 너무 비슷해 거라다.
나를 다는 problematic use.
알레 problematic
use.
Yes, okay.
So what I would like to look more into here is if we have another perspective on treatment, and especially also look into and ask the clients who are in treatment using these kinds of methods that I showed Your Holiness before. Research shows that substance users' goals for experiences of treatment can shed some light on how and why treatment succeeds. And I can give you an example. Like some studies have shown that drug users do not go into treatment in order to become abstinent, but they go into treatment because they want to control their drug use. That could be one goal. They want a pause from a distressful life, trying to get all the drugs all the time. They would like to well, anyway, that's two examples of different goals for treatment. The experience of treatment. One example can be that some drug users who are in treatment have very many difficulties with the control system that are also in the treatment, especially if you get substitution drugs. And that dilemma between actually want to go into treatment but having difficulties not applying, but being in that treatment setting because it feels too controlled for them is sort of something that we could think more about.
I think it might be good if you explained it a little more fully.
Okay.
So if they're taking a substitution drug,
Yeah.
then they're monitored.
Yeah, they're
Right.
monitored.
Explain how that happens
Yeah.
and why it feels invasive.
The way this can be done is that it's monitored so that you have to go to the treatment institution, get your substitution drug. The treatment personnel has to look at you take the drug because the treatment institutions do not want you to misuse that kind of drug or sell it to someone else. So it's monitored in that way. It can be very difficult.
So what would be a substitution drug in the case of marijuana?
There's no there, not for marijuana. Not my. It can be for opiate addiction. It could be.
So what is the substitution drug? What would be a given example?
That could be a methadone, for example,
Okay,
or
so
buprenorphine.
it is a potent drug.
It is a potent drug, yeah.
Tane dipena opium liya addiction yuna. Da kansa delia jodap chebe kala ani opium ke tsab liya 그냥 제 숙소 신다치 때제 또 내가 그 공부대 대치고 그러봐. 근데 제비가는 그 그것도 사로 주제. 그냥 그 대샤는 상마로.
알레.
다도 모니터 치고요.
And one could say that there are very good reasons for monitoring these drugs because they're very potent. But
현대 맞제변에 그것도 치료 기지 총
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, but it can create dilemmas for people either being in treatment or going into treatment.
And also, as you told me, it can deter them from seeking treatment.
Yeah.
So you end up defeating yourself in a way because you want people to go into the treatment system, but there's something about the treatment system that keeps them out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another
그러니까 시간 나다를 때 제고로 어떤 되게 괜찮지 않은 뭐지 디 시험을 좀 되면 버지 돈 트리트먼트 하죠.
Another point I would like to stress is that some of this kind of research point out that the structural conditions that drug users live under affect the incentives to either stay in or out of problematic drug use. If you're in treatment, but you can't really see a possibility of getting access to the labor market or getting access to educational system or other kinds of social health systems, or if you sort of lost your belonging to social networks, then it becomes sort of a balance between is it better for me to stay in drug use, because there's usually a lot of sociality around social networks around drug using communities also. So there's sort of dilemmas here in relation to treatment, and this sort of leads to the next point that substance users' everyday life and the conditions they live under will always affect treatment, and some researchers have pointed out that maybe we could also try and shift the focus and not only look at how clients comply with treatment. Like there are many different forms of treatment and many different kinds of drug users who are in need of treatment, and one drug user might benefit more from one kind of treatment than from another kind of treatment. So this is very important to have that perspective, how a client comply with treatment. But maybe we could also turn it the other way around and say that how can treatment actually concord with clients' everyday life, so that the client in treatment or the patient in treatment do not experience sort of a dilemma or a problem between their everyday life and the treatment they get.
Maybe you could give an example.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, this is a very banal example, but treatment institution also has to be where the drug users are, or the ones who sort of are in need of treatment. If there's a very long way to the treatment institutions, it can be very hard for people to get to treatment. Another one could be in relation to the control aspect, that some people would like to administer their substitution drugs themselves, for example, getting it at a pharmacy instead of getting it at a treatment facility. And yet another one could be that some treatment facilities, especially for more hard drug users, they tend to have an illegal drug market outside the treatment facilities, because a lot of drug users gather around these facilities. So if you don't want to be exposed to sort of the illegal drug market when you're also in treatment, that sort of dilemmas and conditions are important to look at also when we look at treatment.
mental susurya treatment 지난 mental 샤송아.
No, 용적으로 했어.
따디 아니 거라 그 부기 안듯이 그 Addictive 하는 미팅이 그 지키는 아니. 엔디 벌때니 지거래 양거지 수기도 왔다 잡신 지거래.
So you spoke about the kind of adaptation or tailoring of the treatment according to the specific needs of the individual addicts. His Holiness's question is it determined on the basis of an in-depth interview, or do you also use kind of physiological measures to determine what kind of treatment would work?
I think it depends on sort of where you are in the world, how you do that. But my experience from where I come from is that it's on the basis of a sort of an interview before, and then the client is asked different kinds of questions, and usually the clients are asked the same kind of questions. Yeah. But yeah.
다 저기한테 줘 봐. 레벨나리아다. 가서 그래. 그걸 믿으면다 줘 봐. 저장 거라 내가 소수 레벨에서 때는 되는 영어로 봐.
So this morning we heard about individual variations with relation to the presence or the presence of how many D2 receptors there are in the individual, which seems to, dispose them or not dispose them towards kind of drug abuse or substance abuse. So these kind of considerations are not part of the evaluation of what kind of treatment would suit in individuals, in your case, in your study.
No, it's based on clinical. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
So then how would you know that what is the most optimal treatment that the individual needs?
Well, I think we should maybe ask Sarah and Nora about that also, but because they have clinical experience, but it's based on different things. I mean, they're not just, even though we would really like to have that, a whole range of different kinds of treatment. Usually, societies have to choose some kinds of treatment, also based on the population size of the population and so on, because it's also, I mean, it costs money and so on, and you need clients in order to run the treatment facilities and so on, but it depends on the drug. What are the primary drug problem? Is it opiates, or is it cannabis, or is it alcohol, or what is it? So it's depending on the kind of drug that is. But many drug users who come into treatment are multiple. They use different kinds of drugs, not just one drug. Yeah. Okay. So I would like to go to another way out of problematic substance use, which is has by many has been called self-change. And by self-change, we mean individuals who have recovered from an addiction on their own without going into treatment. And of course, I don't know if it's of course.
일반인 손녀가 뜨고 그래. 아버지 찾아서 또 있잖아요.
What can you go back to the previous slide? What does those chains symbolize?
Yeah. Breaking free of addiction.
Free.
Yeah.
I think it was a picture that we found on the internet as just a symbol of freedom.
Yeah. Like this one. So
Yes,
they're reaching for the stars. Yeah.
This is better.
Yeah, this is better. Yeah, I'm glad to have them evaluated. Yeah. Well, there are different kinds of research on self-change, and one is that some have tried to figure out how many self-changes are there, and how common is this way out of problematic substance use, and these data are mainly based on population surveys, population survey results where a representative number of persons in a society are asked the same questions, and then you can calculate how many percentages are have been using drugs or alcohol, and then you can also ask them, have you had any problems with a substance the past year? And one of the instruments used to do this is the DSM instrument, where people are asked about different kinds of problems like withdrawal symptoms, like we talked about yesterday, or if you're using more than you initially intended to do, and things like that. So there are different kinds of questions that people are asked, and I've just made one example here of how many self changes that there are in one population survey from Canada, and it says that if you have one problem, or this survey respondent had said that he or she had one of these DSM problems, it's this number 87.5% who have been in remission the past year, and if it's 6 problems, they have reported 6 problems. It's more than 50% who have been in remission the past year. So it's quite a large number of people who have this experience of getting out of problematic substance use on their own. And of course, these numbers also say that the severity of the problem is very important in relation to whether it's possible to get out of it on your own or not. So I would like to look a little bit into, so what are the reasons for these people who go on to this journey of self-change, and how do they maintain self-change? What do they report to researchers when they have this experience? And some of the most important reasons for starting self-change is that they have experienced some kind of positive life circumstances. And as we talked about earlier, it could be like you get a partner, you get a child, you move to another part of the country where you sort of fit better into society there than you did where you used to live, and so on. So experience of a positive life circumstances. Another one is that social influence from friends and family and partner is very important to start self-change. And then also health concerns. If a person starts to experience loss of memory due to drug use or different kinds of illnesses, that can be a cutting point for person to start self-change. And then yet another important reason is that the individual change perception of the substance used from a positive to a negative. And I think we learned from Mark also on the first day how these perceptions can change about whether it's a pleasure or helpful or joyful to use a drug, or if it sort of changes into a perception of this is negative for me to be in this. And then I should also say, and this is that it's hard to single out one thing and say this is it, but these are sort of the important reasons that these these research results shows, and whether the individuals report that it's certain or planned decision to get out of problematic substance use, that's both. So on the other hand, how can these people maintain? Yeah. So how do these people maintain self-change, not getting into problematic use? And I should say that that many report that they do not necessarily become abstinent. Some of the studies show that the people who become abstinent and wants to become abstinent, that's also the people who were most severely affected by their drug use. But they could also just level it to a consumption level where it doesn't give them problems with their substance use. But very important points.
So in that case, Viveka, when you say remission, so you're not talking about, use. You're talking about not having that same problem.
Yeah.
Okay, so
getting out of not responding to these criteria of the DSM instrument.
So it's not a question of use.
You can become abstinent, or you can become a controlled or consumer of drugs. Yeah. So what is reported in maintaining self-change is
So is it
clear?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I was under the impression remission was judged by use.
Judged by abstinence. But you've said from the slide you showed us before, so people either had one problem or they right, and so the one problem.
If you're in remission, you do not have any problems.
You don't have any problems, right? But you may still be using
it. Yeah.
And
the alcohol, and I would guess that would typically be these more benign substances, so alcohol and marijuana.
Yeah, because there are most studies on those substances.
Right, and for some of these more dangerous drugs that we've been talking about, it may be harder to kind of settle in at a level of use that doesn't get you into trouble. Is that true?
That's true. That's one thing. But another thing is also that some of the more hard drugs or problematic drugs, they are harder to find in population. It's harder to find people in population studies that have used those. So some researchers, they go to other study designs than population surveys in order to investigate these phenomena. And there are quite a few that says that getting out of problematic drug use from opioids or cocaine is also done through self-change. So it's not just,
But if you would describe a continuum from kind of safe, modest use to very serious problems, unlikely that these people we're talking about are at the very extreme end. They're probably somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
True.
Well, some of them are.
There's some who are farther along.
Yeah.
Okay.
But this is also an area, and I'm bringing it up because I think that this area of self-change can sort of is a window to getting more knowledge about substance use and problematic substance use and addiction. But it's also an area that is not as well researched as many other areas of drug abuse or addiction. So in a way, it would be really good if we could do more research in this area in order to gain more insights into what are the kinds of dynamics that are going on here. Because it seems like it's quite a few people who actually manage to get out of problematic substance use on their own. So, and what can we learn from this? And also in relation to how can we learn in relation to setting up treatment facilities? What is it that sort of are important here? And going back to what is important, reported important to maintain self-change is contact with social networks, family, and the labor market. On the other hand, it can be change in social group, family, and or significant other, because if you're in relationships or networks which are also drug-using networks or substance-using networks, that might not be very helpful. Social support is reported as extremely important, And whether people are successful the first time or after several attempts, that's both. So relapsing in self-change is also occurring. And I think we heard that from Mark the first day also, the attempts to and the decisions to try, and it can be done for several months, and then you sort of relapse, and then you go on again. So I think there are important insights we can gain from looking more into this phenomenon on self-change in this area.
So these are kind of suggestive findings.
No, these are based on
research,
on research,
but not a big body of research. You're saying
not in the same way as we know we have research and treatment. I mean, the amount of treatment research is just far oversized.
And you'd like to see more work here.
Yeah, I would like to see more work.
Spelling all of that out more in greater detail.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I would like to go to the second instance that I would like to bring up to Your Holiness from a social science perspective. And this is that we regulate substances in our societies, but that these kinds of regulations can also cause harm. And I will bring up the criminalization of drugs as the example here. And the way societies control substances can be in different ways. It's mainly through policies and laws. And it can be public policy, where we regulate through taxes or regulate products in different ways. It can be health policies. What kind of treatment do we set up in our societies? What kind of services or facilities do we have to reduce the harms of substance use? It can be prevention policy, as we talked about this morning also. What kind of prevention policy can we implement in order to especially get our young people to use less? And then there's control policies that we prohibit some kinds of substances, and we punish people who either use or possess or deal different kinds of substances. And so in this is when I sort of move forward to the criminalization of drugs. This is also a differentiation between illegal drugs and illegal drugs, and saying that the way that we criminalize some kinds of drugs like marijuana, heroin, cocaine, amphetamine, ecstasy, and so forth, these kinds of drugs, there are good arguments for doing this. One is that it protects citizens against health-damaging substances. And the other is that this is one of the arguments that punishment deters individuals from using these substances. And whether this works or not, I mean, we see that a lot of people use these substances even though they are prohibited. That's another discussion. But what I would like to look into is more like, what are the detriments of this drug criminalization, and how do criminalization cause harm to individuals? So the first example I would like to present is that because drugs are criminalized, individuals also get arrested from using or possession of drugs, and it can be even small amounts of drugs for own use that people get arrested. And we see in many parts of the world, and I have examples here from New York in the US, but we also see it in Denmark and in other European countries, that the way that criminalization is handled in practice, like how do the police approach, or how is this? How do we get these people who possess these drugs that that are criminalized and then get arrested, that there's a social and racial imbalance to the way that this is done. And these numbers show that how many people are arrested for marijuana possession in New York. And we see that Black Americans are arrested 4 or 5 times more often than white Americans down here. On the other hand, we see that white Americans use marijuana more often than Black Americans. So there is this sort of racial imbalance to it. And the harms to this is that, of course, it's not good for an individual to have a criminal record. I mean, that can sort of set back the opportunities that an individual have in his or her life. That's one thing. And being imprisoned is, of course, also an experience that can cause harm to individuals.
담라저리 팸블스 거래요.
말해. 다들 보라스나 단디다 지속 돈에 단데 제도 다단들 기반도스. 다 제도 망부지 고 팀게서 해야봐. 팀게서 해야도 디돈에야 냐 지속으로는 미결받는 지속 년년들 용식을 맨날 자샤면 마루와나다 되게 다 마루티 마루와나래. 마루와나도 뉴욕 나로리아 배주 진행 중에 때문에 미르가고 망아. 제 디슈 나오제 인 히스패닉 단도 고주릭티 용하제. 다양 중앙어데 다 팀계획에 제대 배주 제백경기 팀간 간다 간레제 강에 대서대 때문에 배주 진행 가고 망아요데 팀도네 예버 포니디 가부시란 용하제.
정말 좋아.
So there is an unfair system here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Unfair system 하다. Unfair
but-
implement.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's an implementation
Yeah.
unfairness. Yeah.
The way it's implemented is unfair, but it also potentially causes harm to the individual because it's because of getting a criminal record and because of the experience of getting into prison.
괜찮은 셰베네. 다들 대경기 망부진 여기어서 조진의 크리미널 레코드요. 이때는 정한 나올 때 저거 다 대냠용 해봤어.
So if I can just...
Yeah, you're
so
welcome.
the U.S., my country, has a very particular problem here, and Nora knows that too, and others too. We even have a word for it in the United States, and it's a shameful word. It's called mass incarceration. There are so many people being put in jails, and we have been waging a so-called war on drugs that has failed. And what it has done is to create this phenomenon. The statistics, so the United States has a little over 5% of the population of the world, and we have nearly 25% of the people who are jailed across the entire world. So and we have more people in jail than any other nation. And this issue of the racial inequities that you picked up on, Your Holiness, is very serious. So one statistic is that in the United States, Blacks represent about 13% of our population, and they represent about 45% of people who are in jail for drug violations. Many of those drug violations are non-violent. So we tend to think that you go to jail because you're involved in a very violent culture, but many of them, the person who's jailed hasn't done anything violent, but has possessed this drug or maybe sold it. And the studies that have been done seem to indicate that the use of drugs by blacks and whites in the U.S. isn't dramatically different. So it's not about they're using them more. It's about a serious inequity, a serious bias that's built into this war on drugs. Our Attorney General recently has been speaking out against it. But the problem we now have, and this is it makes it even worse. We have a very big now private for-profit industry that's managing this mass incarceration system that we've created for ourselves.
어딘게 고스래.
His Holiness says that he has heard of that problem.
Right,
yeah.
and so how you back...
Sometimes-
Yeah.
즉 남자 이 맛이었지.
So when he first heard of this kind of privatization of the prison system and how it's for-profit system, he said it
was
was
construct more prison. So you have to find prisoner.
Yeah.
That's exactly
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
That's exactly
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So it's another way. It's another example. We've heard several where money creates terrible problems for society, and we have a very serious problem. There are people who've written about
많이
it.
그래서 많이 비슷한 게 맞아.
So it's always the thing. It's not the money. It's the user,
greed,
the
the
user
greed.
of the money.
유저
Yeah.
많이.
Yeah.
Some people have even referred to this inequity as American apartheid. That's the term they've used. Yeah.
Apartheid.
I would just like to add that even though the system in Europe is different, we still see that around 30 to 60, depending on the country, of the people in prisons are that's related. It's drug offences, and most of them are not, again, violent offense. It's just for possession, for own use, or a little bit more. So a lot of the prison populations are actually there due to drugs, but non-violent.
Right. And of course, we could be building schools and other things with the
Yeah.
money we're investing.
Yeah. So the other
근데 디 가서 저런 거 이제 신유임이 개발이 되는
So those who are in incarceration, I mean, is there a difference in terms of the education status? Less education, you're more
Yes.
likely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. There's the racial imbalance and also an imbalance in terms of social status, socioeconomic status.
yeah.
It's a huge injustice.
If the gap rich and poor reduce, some help.
Will it help if the kind of the social inequity is reduced a
Oh,
little bit?
in the society.
Yes.
I don't know. It's it's increasing, as Your Holiness knows, and that may be part of the problem. Yeah. I'm not sure how reducing that would
Gap, yeah.
solve this particular problem. There are
Yes.
efforts. There are mandatory sentencing requirements that were built into this war on drugs. So when a drug user comes before a judge, this is the problem. It comes before the judge has no choice. The judge is required to sentence this person to go to jail. And that is one of the things that could be changed. And Eric Holder, who is the U.S. Attorney General, has spoken about trying to change that. But again, there is this very large industry that has a very vested interest in keeping this. So there are things we can do, but it's a serious problem. Nora, you probably know even more about it. But.
Well, there's been an attempt, and again, it's in the good direction, but it's the implementation that doesn't always work. The drug courts, and the drug courts have actually create a completely different model with very much of a success. So a person that is taking drugs is brought in front of a judge, and the judge can give them the option to either go to prison or jail or to go to a treatment program. And the outcomes are much, much better when the person chooses, and basically all of them choose to go to the treatment program. The problem, though, is that there's not sufficient infrastructure to offer the drug court option for a significant number. So perhaps 10% of the individuals get offered the drug court. And if you look at it in terms of ethnicity, it's neither a fair system. So not everybody has exactly the same right.
Right. Thank you.
작은 예를 음지지를 가면 되신 거하고 말해.
다른 데도 illegal drug.
네.
Illegal drug. Cocaine, opiate. So we're talking about illegal substances here.
Yeah.
Yes.
The ones that are
Yes.
criminal. Yeah.
I would just like to add that some of the
진짜 수다면은 legal스, 다 legal이나 illegal이나 그다음에 음지 미국에 소달 때니 이제 수기 벌 때니 잠바지는 음지 recommendation legal스. 음지 recommendation illegal 세션 가야 돼.
So how about coming up with a system where, for specific needs of individual, there could be certain types of drugs which, if a medical profession,
Any drugs.
any drugs.
Usually is considered something illegal.
But based on a medical profession, medical doctor's kind of observation and the need of that patient, could be made legal for that individual.
Yes.
But otherwise, it could be illegal. Is that possible?
There are movements in that direction.
Yeah.
Again, Nora will know more about it, calling it medical marijuana,
Yeah.
making it available.
And 계시적으로는 음지 출신 야구하는.
And in that case, if you do need to imprison someone, then you can imprison the doctor who prescribed.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And England, yeah, the
England.
England.
England, yeah, heroin the doctor get on prescription teacher sa to sa choy the yoris. They relate and marijuana the doctor get better can chip nasu ngong kaza goyal.
수자.
If I could just
So
add to,
marijuana medical use is for pain relief. Is that the idea? Yeah.
yeah,
Pain,
yeah,
nausea, and they are using it for
Mig nasa juice glaucoma da.
yeah,
Glaucoma
sclerosis,
cancer,
cancer, for the nausea.
yeah,
rochugurs and marijuana.
different kinds of pain relief, yeah.
그래서 안 아메리카 초를 주고 말해.
So is that the case in the States or no?
In certain states, yeah,
Right.
Oh.
It goes.
yeah,
We
Yeah.
have the jurisdiction state by state in the U.S., so different states have different policies.
And two states, as Mark was commenting, two states is freely available. It's legal for recreation purposes, and in the other one is for so-called medical purposes.
There are two states where it's freely available for
Yes,
recreation.
Colorado and Washington.
그래서 좋대.
Now, then Colorado, then Washington, nearly, and then the TRT, and then NASA, you may not be super freely available. So this is just marijuana, though.
Yes.
yeah,
Cannabis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
그냥 네 탈로는 쓰지 말아요.
Isn't that a kind of an extreme?
In my view, it is. It is, but these are, again, what we're discussing. I mean, the discussion right now of how important the social systems are and the perception in some states through culture that marijuana is not harmful and therefore it should be readily available. Just like at the beginning of the last century, it was felt that cocaine was not harmful and it had a lot of medicinal purposes and it was legal until the consequences were too negative, too devastating, and it was made illegal in 1914.
Cocaine
But in-
illegal Islam.
In the Netherlands, where I live, it's completely legal. Pot, hash, all cannabis products are completely legal, and so are some psychedelic mushrooms. And you know what the result is? Nothing. People drink. That's the result. They drink beer.
So what do you mean results are nothing?
I mean
There's
to
no
say
difference.
that legalizing
The use has not increased.
has not increased the problem at all. The only people who smoke pot and hash are usually American tourists.
So it has improved tourism for the Netherlands.
yeah. Yeah,
그러나서는 탈루 말해서 그래.
yeah,
가.
탈루 말해서.
어.
그래서 the legal search 하면 베네트 네덜란드에 상마 legal search 디경기 현재 채로 치요 말해서.
I would just like to add to Nora's comment. No, sorry.
스테이트 일 찍다. 초를 그래.
저거다 말하나 나.
다 마셔서는 여러
그래.
번. 탈출 수 있어 그래. 최대 미 지거래. 철수비 지거래.
So His Holiness's question is the following: given that there are two states, Washington and Colorado, where marijuana
I mean, two
is,
categories. One category allow, one category illegal.
so the kind of
초보다 마셔고.
the state 가가 나.
스트레스 카시나 초. 카시나 마셔서 그래. 스트레스 하지디 멤버 간다 멤버 개념으로. 멤버 지거래 수 지거래.
So His Holiness's question is this: in the states, in one country, you have states like Colorado and Seattle, which makes marijuana,
Washington.
Washington, yeah.
legal, and then other states which makes it not legal. So who makes the decision? Who determines it? Is it
The electorate.
a medical body
No, it's
or
voted.
policy?
Policy,
Sure.
politics.
어.
Right.
Sure.
They have a
Then
referendum.
majority.
Right.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The people decided.
We see the same thing in Europe, that different countries in Europe have different policies on marijuana. That in some countries it is illegal to it's legal to use it and to possess it for own possession for own use, but not for dealing with it.
Yeah, no, that point that I was going to say when it says, well, it's the majority. The problem is that there are invested interests that are putting enormous amount of money in order to make the perception of people that marijuana is not harmful, because there is a lot of money to be made.
Right.
And what you've already started to see in places like Colorado is a gigantic industry for the production of cannabinoids. And once you create these individuals that have an economic interest in the product, it's very difficult to change it. Like with alcohol. It's a perfect example of the lobbies for alcohol, the lobbies for tobacco, very difficult then to go backwards.
Right. But we should allow Vibeke to continue. Yes.
Should I make comments to, or just leave the comments on this discussion? Yeah, I'll move
keep
on.
going,
Yeah. So a second example I would like to put forward to His Holiness, Your Holiness, is that sometimes criminal policy is, or social policy and criminal policy are interwoven with each other. And this creates a social imbalance. And here again, the US is an example that if you're convicted for a drug offense, you are banned from access to public housing for low-income persons, unable to get financial assistance to low-income families, food assistance, or education funding. And this sort of gives drug offenders from low socioeconomic groups a disadvantage. They're sort of double punished. They get convicted, but they also get ineligible for social benefits. People from high socioeconomic income groups, they are not eligible for social benefits anyway, so they won't have this double punishment. So there's some dilemmas and some harms involved in these policies. And the last example I would like to put forward is that criminal policy seems in very many places to overrule public health policy, because it's not only the substances that causes harm to individuals, but depending on the substance use, for example, opiates, the way that heroin is used can also cause harm, and therefore there are movements and public health policies such as harm reduction that sort of look at, well, we have drug users who use drugs, and this is harmful in itself, but the way they're used and where they're used can also be quite harmful. And one thing is that we have seen, it started in the 80s and early 90s, that there's been an epidemic of HIV/AIDS and hepatitis C among drug users because they have been sharing equipment or syringes. So could we set up services where needle and syringe exchange are possible, so that kind of harm is not put upon drug users? And
there are such programs.
There are such programs in some places, but not in all places.
Not widespread. Yeah.
No. Another debated service is drug consumption rooms, where drug users have the possibility to take their drugs under supervised conditions. And these drug consumption rooms are set up to prevent overdose and health damage to drug users, but also to sort of see to that the nuisance for the public that drug users can create in neighborhoods are placed within these drug consumption rooms instead of in the streets. But these kinds of measures are also highly debated, because does these actually condone illegal behavior? And can we accept that we set up services where we also sort of accept that drug drugs are taken and drugs are used, even though it's a criminalized action or behavior.
더불어 내가 따르시 단두주리데 틈도네 다주지 제자베 주고대야 최대한 게 차네 그저 내용 것도 되게 돈을 로봇 체거도 고견직도 간선나 디리티 틈단 개베나 또 고배주지 난들은 너버 충원 돈에 배주지 난 라베 틈단 개베 이제 배주지 랍게 소리 차고 그러면서 대강에 돼.
And the last example of one of these harm reduction measures is to set up treatment facilities where abstinence is not required, but where you can sort of, if it's a treatment program where substitution drugs is involved, where you can get your substitution drug, not for just a certain period of time, but for as long as you need it. And this leads me to the conclusion of this sort of social science perspective into addiction and problematic drug use, that it is always experienced by individuals who are embedded in social and cultural relations and social and cultural settings or contexts, and that not only the substances used, but also the way societies control and regulate substances can cause harm to individuals as well as communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Viveka. So before we invite in other voices, I wonder if you have a question that you'd like to pose to His Holiness.
Yes. Diana started out saying something about also that these drugs are, especially legal drugs, are also very stigmatized in our societies. And drug users who use these illegal drugs become stigmatized and can be marginalized in our societies. So my question to Your Holiness is, how can we sort of assure that we as communities and as societies do not stigmatize these people, and if we have stigmatized them, and if we have stigmatized them, how can we sort of reverse that so that they can be included into our social relations and societies? Because it seems like social networks and societies and belonging to these contexts are very important.
I think basically, you see, these people also say human being, right? I would like to ask, but
So, for example, if we marginalize them, if we don't accept them as part of the mainstream society, but if one of these individuals are killed by someone, will we consider that a murder?
Yes.
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 So they still consider human being.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But how much effort do we put into figuring out who did murder this person?
And also I think the reality, even you see the criminal person, see, under different circumstances, or mainly I think increased awareness, then one very negative person, due to different circumstances, can be a very positive person. So it is much better. Give them opportunity.
Yes.
So in order to do that, bring them part of the society.
Right.
If reject, then this person again now, hopeless.
Then they go through then they go through the cycle of giving up hope, and they may also become defiant. They just don't care.
Right. Right.
I think in the past, some discussions, some people, the prison lives in Shivaji, 따도 지금 되게 독자 쉽지겠어. 따진 딜레 안다 가서 명 가서 정원 가서 디할. 무기한다 내가 고시층이지. 아도 아잘라디. ngāngāshī. Kōrā mō yī jī zāmbā zō gōmdyāyamdē, jī lūtīmdē, zāmbā zō shāmbū chēni, shīwū dīwa chīmsī dō.
Yes. His Holiness was saying that he had been exposed to concerns in some context in the conversations and conferences in the West, concerns on the part of some non-profit organizations about the way in which the prisoners are treated when they're in incarceration, and how the prison authorities, kind of the negative ways in which they are perceived and so on, which seems to really suggest a kind of a sense of rejection and not accepting them as part of the mainstream society. And in this context, the experience of one of the chief prison authorities in Delhi, the Tihar jail, I think it's Kiran Bedi, right?
Oh, yes.
Kiran Bedi shared with His Holiness that while she was running that prison as the main person, she was able to introduce other programs such as bringing in meditation and other forms of intervention, which has really changed the life of these prisons and really made a dramatic difference to the prisoners. So that's a very positive.
So that clearly shows
Right.
if you take care of them,
Right.
as a human being,
Yeah.
you see, they develop some kind of sense of responsibility. If you reject, okay.
Right.
And I was, one time I met one in Italy. Someone I met, you see, he or that person, you see, usually go to prison and give some teaching or some sort of talks. So there are such cases, I think.
So it's really important to find a way of making them feel that they are not rejected.
Right. Right. Good.
So,
thank you. Thank you, Your Holiness. So, I think it was yesterday, Your Holiness, when we were talking about how to make sure that people who are in these terrible problems are not pushed to the sides. You said, we have in the Christian tradition the belief that there is that of God in every person, and the Buddhist tradition, the
Buddha nature.
The Buddha nature. And one of the questions is, so what do we have in a secular society that can substitute for that? We have a wonderful scholar with us, Wendy Farley, who has made of her career the study of early Christian mystics, mostly women. She is one of the great experts on that subject. And I wondered, Wendy, if I could bring you in, you're furrowing your brow.
Great, the word great.
Great is the wrong word. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So is there anything you can add to kind of help us see this in another perspective? How did they think about this struggle?
One of the things I love about the desert ascetics and the women contemplatives is that they practice non-judgment very assiduously. They were famous for drawing in people from society that were rejected by everyone else. They would hide murderers because they were opposed to the death penalty, and they would raise children that had been abandoned. They bought girls who were going to be sold into slavery. So they were very active in caring for the dregs of society, people who no one else would recognize. And it was precisely because they thought every single person, they would say, are God-bearers. Right. And that their training was to recognize in everyone that they are God-bearers. And by recognizing it, could inflame it in them. So that's I suppose that would be, if you translate that into the contemporary situation, that the contemplative practice is to give you eyes to see something that is harder to see without that. To see someone who's a bad drug addict, or if you're a racist, to see a black kid, smoking a joint or whatever, and you're very condemning. A contemplative wants to make you able to see, and what you see is that this is a beautiful, luminous being, and to respond to them in that way. And that's what the practices are for. So I know that Sarah has been anxious to get in on this because she's very much involved in treatment, which is so important to Vipika's conversation. So I don't want to say more right now because we don't have much time.
All right, let's go to Sarah. Can you tell us about what you're speaking on Friday morning, but some sense of, as you respond to Viveka's presentation, what your research has suggested about this process of self-treatment, self-cure, or anything that kind of came to you as you were listening?
Well, actually, what I was just responding to here and listening to Wendy and Viveka is the role of shame. And what we do know is that any kind of negative affective experience, whether it's shame, depression, anxiety, is not helpful for folks trying to make positive changes in their lives. And so both, I think, shame and judgment directed towards self or felt from society is not going to be helpful in this process if we're wanting to make change. From a treatment perspective and drawing on the contemplative practices, there are some beautiful ways to work with that.
Could you say a bit about
sure,
how you
I
do
think
that?
Both from a directed towards self and directed outwards, there are practices that explicitly help to foster non-judgmental attitudes, to first of all recognize our judgments and our biases towards ourselves and others, and then to practice very specifically ways to relate to our own experience without judgment and with some compassion in a way that actually facilitates change much more than the harshness and the judgment would, even though that's where we tend to go. So practicing kindness, practicing compassion, practicing just this having this awareness and recognition that these are human processes. And as we saw from Nora's presentation and Ken's presentation, and from you, Vibeke, that this, all of these are pointing to this is clearly part of human nature.
Right.
It's so prevalent, and it has, neuropsychological causes. It has societal causes. So it only makes sense to meet that with understanding and compassion, and look at what actually facilitates change. Which is not judgment and shame, but rather some compassion and kindness.
So that would be another element to add to the list that Vibeke had of the variables that help to produce successful outcomes in treatment.
Yeah.
This issue of shame, really bringing it to the surface, dealing
Absolutely,
with it.
and it's so prevalent, I think. I mean, in all of us, obviously, but in working with clients, I see just so much self-hatred and shame and a sense of just total devaluing of themselves, and to begin to recognize that and work on practices of sending kindness towards self and compassion towards self, and recognizing the really beautiful intentions and efforts that people are making in this process of change.
Great, thank you. Arthur.
It's a question to you, Vibeke, and maybe others. Use of many of these substances, at least, by indigenous peoples. In other words, there are social and cultural contexts in which these are totally integrated into their whole society. Is there something we can learn from that?
Yes, I think there is. Like, coca leaves have been chewed in South America for many centuries, and opium have been used in in the triangle of Burma, Laos, and China, and that part of the world, and it has been in the same way as we sort of consume alcohol. Marijuana has been used in this part of the world very much. India, Nepal, the particular part we are in right now, and these substances are consumed in the same way as we can consume alcohol or consume alcohol in the West as the most widespread substance used at all in the West, and looking more into how these practices of use of these different kinds of substances are interrelated into everyday life. Maybe not everyday life, but at least feasts and celebrations and so on. I think we can learn something from that.
So before we close, at lunch we were having a conversation about all of this, having just heard from Nora, and she pointed out something I hadn't known, which is there is now a subfield of neuroscience called social neuroscience, so kind of combining this social science perspective with this deep sort of basic science perspective. I wonder if you could just tell us a little word about what it is that social neuroscientists think about and do.
Yes, and I'm not going to resist the temptation to where my brain jumps back and forward, and I'll come to that question.
Fine, you make...
But where is it? Okay, there it is. The other thing that we can learn, because I think we have to also look at the data and be objective, from the use of legal substances in large civilizations for many, many centuries. In the United States, the main cause of mortality and morbidity by far, are not illicit substances, are alcohol and tobacco, the
yes.
legal ones. Not because they are more dangerous, not at all, but because they are widely available, the norms accept them as safe, and as a result of that, more people get exposed to them. And therefore, by probability, mathematically you can look at it, simple, more people get exposed, more adverse effects. So I think that we cannot forget that as we go into these discussions of legalization. And I also think we have to make the clear-cut distinction that you can decriminalize a drug without legalizing it. So you don't need to put a person that's taking marijuana into the jail,
right.
But you do not want to create an incentive for a market to produce more marijuana because you'll have more people exposed. So that was, I apologize, I could not resist.
That's good. And I did present that data.
Yeah.
But I think we need to add to that the whole illegal substance market is actually also very large, and it also creates a lot of harm that we have illegal markets.
Right.
Yeah, no, and we can't go into...
Wait,
it's just that that's...
Yeah, and
so that's kind of a middle way.
I think
middle way,
that is
kind of a middle
realistic.
way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Decriminalize, but not make it legal.
That's
Yes.
right.
your question about the social neuroscience, which is another aspect that has been fascinating, which is starting to understand what structures in our brain are responsible for processing social behaviors and social emotions. And imaging technologies like the one we were discussing have been actually utilized to start to map the networks that are activated in those behaviors or situations. For example, if you are to make a moral judgment, how does the brain work? And how is it influenced, that function of the brain, by your prior culture or unique circumstances? And for example, a very interesting study that, again, captures what you were saying, Vivako, of the making harm, is that when you put someone in prison, it's extraordinarily stressful. It's probably one of the most degrading things that you can do an individual. And the worst thing you can do in a prison is isolate them. So that's the worst punishment. You can do experiments like that in animals. And if you isolate an animal, what you do is that D2 receptors, which we're discussing, goes down. So by putting individuals that are addicted to drugs into a prison system, you're actually worsening their likelihood of succeeding and reintegrating. So that's another example about how we can use imaging to understand social structures that we generate in order to punish people.
Thank you. So,
Let it alone.
Mathieu, please.
You said is exactly what Contra Bhutan did. You can't buy any Krawatu anywhere, but you are not punished if you bring some from India and smoke. So it is very, very little. There's just no way to buy anywhere. And it's succeed throughout the country. So it's a quite good success because very, very few people smoke. So.
Yes.
Julia.
야, 그것도 desire,다. 마음도 desire,다.
Better not because they grow it from there in the garden.
His Holiness is saying that they do have another substitute, which is the betel nuts.
Yes.
소배 말자 나고 소 나고 소식도.
So
소 세우 소식.
the teeth become yellow or,
Right, yeah.
red.
Yeah.
Well, we have reached our time boundary, Your Holiness. I want to thank you, Vibeke, for your very interesting presentation. We've had an extremely full day, I think, across a wide spectrum of concerns, starting all the way deep in the brain and moving out into the larger society. So we thank everyone for a fascinating day, and Your Holiness, thanks to you.